4 years after the discovery of COVID-19, the world is finally recovering from the worst of the devastating effects of the virus. But for some, the damage continues in the form of long COVID. In Montezuma County, Colorado, Boyd Frank shares his story.
I still have problems with my lungs, and that could be a lifelong thing or it could be a down the road thing that they could heal, but they're damaged right now. So every once in a while I have to suck on an oxygen tube, which I'm not happy with. Um, don't have an appetite. Uh, my memory sucks. I have to write things down. Andrea has to write things down for me. Like when I get up in the morning and go to the bathroom, she writes stuff on the mirror for me to not forget to do during the day. And then I have to come out to the fridge and there's the same list on the fridge because sometimes I forget from there to here.
Registered nurse Erica Messenger, COVID-19 public health nurse for Montezuma County Public Health Department, talks more about long COVID.
Basically what was happening is people would get COVID. They'd be sick for a while, sometimes up to 2-3 weeks, but usually 5 days or so is the more typical amount. And then there was this group of people that they would just continue to be sick, and their symptoms were going longer than 4 weeks, and they would go on for sometimes many more weeks after that, and months, and now we're going into years. And so they had to define what exactly that was. And so they call it long COVID.
Ms. Messenger goes on to list the symptoms of long COVID.
Symptoms that get worse instead of getting better. So let's say you get, all this COVID symptoms, which looks a lot like flu, but instead of you slowly getting better, you're actually potentially getting worse, or your symptoms stay the same. And then a fever that just doesn't go away. So those are like some primary things. And then later on down the line, we're looking at like chest pain, cough, difficulty breathing, shortness of breath. So there's a lot of respiratory issues, tachycardia, which is rapid beating heart, difficulty thinking and concentrating, kind of all the things that you experience during COVID. They call that COVID fog, that brain fog that you get with COVID, but that just kind of lasts. You can have a headache, sleep problems, dizziness, pins and needles in your extremities, but that could potentially be a source of respiratory compromise. So your tissues in your extremities aren't perfusing with oxygen because you're just not getting that air. Change in smell or taste that doesn't go away. And then things like depression and anxiety can linger. But again, it's hard to tell, if that's a result of long COVID or not. Digestive symptoms, you can have diarrhea, stomach pains, and then you can have a full body rash. I've seen that before, or an isolated rash, let's say in one area that just doesn't seem to go away. And changes in menstrual cycle, joint pain, muscular pain. So those are all things that sometimes you have several of those at once, and sometimes you can have one. But the key is usually that these things will just continue after you've had COVID. But there are people that, I've heard kind of anecdotal reports where people will, they'll have COVID, they still have lingering symptoms that maybe got a little bit better, but it just kind of hangs on. And then later on, they'll have some sort of, event, like they'll end up contracting diabetes, or all of a sudden this rash showed up. They just never fully recovered, and it's like their system's wearing out from having to fight this thing off, and so they end up getting sicker often, picking up just kind of community illnesses, because their immune system is down.